Greetings, fellow advanced do-it-yourself automotive enthusiasts, and anybody else that happens to be here. So what we are going to do today is this is going to be a follow-up video to the previous P0171-0174 quiz video, which I will put a link in the description to. In that video, we went and took a look at why this Trans Am may possibly have a P0171 code on its check engine light. We took a little quiz to test fuel trim diagnostic skills. And then also I asked you guys to come up with your hypotheses on what might be some good reasons that this car might have the code and how we would test them. So I asked you guys to come up with logical reasons why the data supports your conclusion, and more importantly, how you would test your conclusion as opposed to just going to replace parts. So in this video, what we will do is first go over a quick review of the data just to refresh your memories, and maybe you might take a second look at it. We will also, of course, go over the ideas that were brought up that are relevant and applicable to the data set that we got. And then, of course, we will test those theories. So that's what we're going to do today. But first, a little story about you. So in this story, one of these guys is going to be you. And what we've got is three guys that are not trying to figure out a lean condition, but for simplicity for the story, they are trying to figure out a misfire. And of course, what we've got up here is a spark plug wire, a coil control wire, and of course, PCM. And the car has a P0301 code to help with this diagnosis. So the first guy takes a look at it and he says, let's see if we have control from the computer to the coil, because if we don't, then we've got a bad day coming here. So he checks for control from the PCM to the coil, and he determines that there is indeed signal there. So as far as for the PCM, he rules out the PCM. So then he thinks, well, it could be possibly a bad coil. So what he does is he goes ahead and he unplugs the wire here at the coil, tests for spark at the coil. There is spark. He rules that out as not being it. So then he determines, well, we're down to either the wire or the plug, and it's probably not going to be a wire, I don't think, but it could be. So what he does is he decides that he's going to take off the plug here because it's a little bit easy for him to do this. And he just figures he's going to go ahead and swap the plug with the adjacent cylinder to see if this code moves. So he goes ahead and he swaps the plug with the adjacent cylinder, and he finds that the problem still turns out to be an 0301. So he rules out it is not the plug. The only thing left is this wire. He goes ahead, removes the wire, and he tests the wire for continuity, and he finds that there is an open in the wire. Obviously, bad spark plug wire, so he replaces the spark plug wire, fixes the problem. Well done. Now, guy number two comes up to do his thing. So he takes a look at it and he decides that he's going to follow a procedure working from the plug on back. So what he does is he disconnects the wire right there at the plug, and he tests for spark here, and he finds there is no spark at that area there. So he rules out, well, the plug is certainly not the problem. So then what he does is he decides to go ahead, pull out the spark plug wire altogether, and just test for continuity at the spark plug wire, and he finds, whoa, there is an open in this spark plug wire. Holy cow, found the problem, calls bad spark plug wire, replaces it. Well done, the car is fixed. And now we come to our third guy, and he says, well, misfire, huh? I was just watching Scotty Kilmer, and he says it could be an ignition problem. So I'm going to go ahead and replace plugs and wires on the car. Probably needs them anyway. So he goes ahead, replaces plugs and wires on the car, and of course, fixes the problem. So the moral to the story here is, if you use a rational, methodical, scientific approach, a reasoning approach to things, then the fact is that you are always right in every step of the way you go, even if you happen to be wrong in some ways. And if you just guess at stuff like a parts changer, then you are always wrong, even if you happen to guess right. So the point is there is no difference between these two guys because, and this is not some kind of thing that I'm saying is some big kumbaya for everybody on the channel. It is actually a fact with logic and reasoning that the reasoning and logic are the important thing, and you do not get credit for guessing. Both of these guys came to a point where they had to use their reasoning and logic to choose one direction, and any direction seems good. This guy just happened to be lucky that he went in the direction of the wire. So the point is, it makes no difference that this guy went through 3 incorrect guesses before he finally reasoned the exact cause must be the only thing left. And this guy was able to reason the exact cause with fewer guesses. The guesses don't count. The fact that this guy just took a guess and happened to get it right makes him a complete idiot. And of course, he doesn't even know it because he's thinking, what are you talking about? I got it right. But he is an idiot. And the other thing is, if this guy goes back to these two and says, ha ha, look at me, I got it right faster than both of you guys put together with your reasoning and logic, so I'm the best. Well, in that case, that changes things dramatically because now he is a complete idiot that needs to be stabbed right in the throat. So anyway, what is the reason I am telling this story? Well, here is why. So the reason is because I know that in scenarios like what we're going to do in this video today, there tends to be a natural sort of competition to see, did you get it right? And what I want you to understand is that when I put the list of everybody's ideas up on the board, if your idea is on the board, you did get it right because you came up with that thing on the board because you wrote a logical, necessary conclusion based on the evidence provided in the previous video. I did not put anything up there where people guessed. I didn't put anything up there where people put stuff that clearly was contradictory to the evidence. And really, actually, very few people, if any, did that anyway, which is the whole point of the channel. But the point is that also, if you do happen to get it right, so to speak, to not gloat about it on my channel because I want you to be smart enough to understand that you had no more reason to come to that conclusion and be correct than somebody who came to a conclusion that turned out not to be it, because both conclusions are necessitated by the evidence. In other words, both of you guys are those same mechanics pretty much, but neither of you is the dunce. You see my point here, I hope. So no gloating on the right answer or anything like that, because this is a logical channel. So that said, let's fix this bitch. Okay, first let's review our data very quickly. So in the top graph up here, I've got my engine speed. In the lower graph in red, we've got long-term fuel trim bank 1. And you know what? This is way off scale. Let me fix this scale, sorry. Okay, that's a lot better. Okay, so in this, we've got our long-term fuel trim bank 1 in red, long-term fuel trim bank 2 in green. And what we see is obviously bank 2 seems very stable. The fuel trim's a little high. I believe it was hanging around 4 or so, not even 5. And that's just fine. As I've said before, I don't really blink at a fuel trim plus or minus 5 for any reason. Over 10, I would be a little concerned. And what we're seeing is some synchronicity here with an increase in engine RPM or engine load, and everywhere we increase the load, we see the long-term fuel trim on bank 1 increases. Now, here's a special situation here that I also got some data from the O2 sensors down here. Red is O2 sensor 1, bank 1, green, of course, sensor 1, bank 2. And we can see that at wide open throttle here, we do get, of course, our lean condition, and we see that we do get a rich condition with the O2 sensor, so a little bit of a clue there. But we see that this is very synchronous, that whenever it seems I'm stepping on the gas pedal, we are getting a lean condition induced on only bank 1. So that was the data from last time. There is some more data that I didn't show last time that some of you asked about, and also another interesting thing too, but let me show you some of that. Some people asked about misfire codes, and so I brought up misfires for bank 1, and there were no misfires during this whole event. And as I said, there was no drivability issues at all, so there is no issue here with misfire possibly causing a lean code, but indeed that is a definite consideration that would cause a lean code with the unburned oxygen. Also, I wanted to show something else here. So on here I'm showing the short-term fuel trim data, and in the short-term fuel trim data we see that there is nothing where there is a counteraction with the long-term fuel trims. If anything, we get a combined fuel trim effect. So the fuel trim is actually higher than what I've shown just with the long-term fuel trim. So it's not as if we have some kind of condition where we've got a very, very high long-term fuel trim, but a very low short-term fuel trim. And then I wanted to show another thing, and that would be down here. This has nothing to do with this video at all, but actually I just wanted to throw this in because of some discussions going on in some other videos. What I have down here is my bank 1 sensor 2 and bank 2 sensor 2. And you can see that whatever the problem is causing this fuel trim issue is having no effect whatsoever on the bank 1 sensor 2 or bank 2 sensor 2. It will not cause a false P0430 or P0420 code. So I just wanted to throw that in there. So if this turns out to be maybe an exhaust leak at the manifold, which is an entire possibility, it would not cause a false code on the catalytic converter, as we've discussed in some previous videos and some other people brought up. So I just wanted to go ahead and show that. So in summary, if you understand this stuff, then it's very obvious to you that we have a bank 1 specific issue where as we increase RPM, we have an increase in fuel trim throwing the code. We also obviously rule out, this is not a vacuum leak. That is self-evident. If you don't understand why, then please see my video, Secret of Engine Diagnosis Fuel Trims, and you will clearly understand why and be very good at diagnosing such things. So for all of you guys that supplied some ideas, we're going to go ahead and list those now, and then of course differentially rule them out until we find out what is wrong with this car. Now I'm going to show you a little trick though, okay? Let's see if we can keep that up there. I may redraw this a little smaller just as a reminder of what we're looking for. Now it goes without saying that when I list these things on here, that's a great way of doing it, but on something like this, see, the thing is, there are several things that we can think of in a systematic sort of mode that could cause this. So instead of thinking, well, a misfire could cause that, an exhaust leak could cause that, a fuel injector could cause that, because they all can, but they cause it for different reasons. A fuel injector issue would be a different reason that you would see this being a fit than an exhaust leak would be an equal fit. So the way that I often like to do this is, instead of trying to think of all the individual components, which of course we have to do, but to make it easier to do that, what I do is I try to generalize to thinking of all the possible systems that we could have that creates this effect, and then think of the components that would contribute to that systemic effect. For example, that I can think of three possibilities. Okay, one possibility is we are getting a insufficient fuel delivery at bank 1, and again only under load. Now under this, what would be the components that would explain that? By far the most suggested one was obviously a injector imbalance. And of course, we need a way to test that, and what we're going to do is a balance test. Now, what other things could cause an insufficient fuel delivery, but only on bank 1? So obviously we're not going to consider like a fuel pump or something like this. So we need to think of other things here. And it makes it a little bit easier to make sure we don't miss anything. Now, of course, the second possibility, and obviously we're not going to have room under here, and that's okay. I think we all will remember this. So our second possibility that would cause that problem would be anything that causes an increase in unmetered air in bank 1 under load. Now, obviously, one of the more common things that people brought up that would be a possibility with that would be exhaust leak. Okay, so you see the pattern here. Now, what would the third possibility be? Well, the third possibility would be what it matters, what I am guessing the problem will be, because I agree all of these are reasonable. But the third possibility is a perceived data from 1 and 2. In other words, some problem with the oxygen sensor. So in other words, the oxygen sensor is not reading properly. And technically, just to be scientific, there is a fourth one. And that fourth possibility is that we have a perceived normal condition from bank 2. So in other words, this is a problem on both banks, but bank 2 is falsely reporting normal. Now, the odds of that are infinitesimal. We see we've got normal oxygen and fuel trim response and everything, but technically it's something that as a scientist you consider, and you do actually have to show that it's not a possibility. So we're going to put a false normal reading. But we're going to put this at the very end. This is not something that we are going to seriously consider as a possibility. That's just not very likely. So what I'm going to do now is go through, oh, by the way, we do need a way to test this. And the way to test that is the same way, one way that I was planning on testing the O2 issue. And only one other person brought this up, by the way. I want to swap O2 sensors on each bank. And this would also be a way to validate that we don't have a false normal reading. But if we swap the O2 sensors and that lean response moves to the other bank, well, then we're done. It's a bad O2 sensor. There is no argument about it. But what we're going to do is we're going to go in this order, mostly because it tends to be the order that people brought up the ideas. And you know what? If it turns out this is an injector imbalance, which I actually don't think it will be, but we'll see. But if it turns out it's an injector imbalance, well, then I guess we're done. I don't think it's going to be an injector imbalance, though. There's a little bit of evidence that contradicts this. One of them is I would not expect, if we have like a clogged injector or something, that we would see the O2 sensor go rich at wide open throttle. And the other thing is the fact that since the fuel trim does clearly, because our short trims are back at 0, despite that really high long-term fuel trim, fuel delivery is compensating for whatever the issue is. And it would just be a little odd that fuel delivery would both be the problem, but also be able to compensate for the problem at the same time. So I'm not really thinking this will be it, but this was overwhelming, the highest response, so we are going to do that. All right, and another thing that I had thought, again, very unlikely, I believe, but it could be an electrical control high resistance at the injector, some wiring high resistance at the injector, maybe also causing an imbalance. Not likely. Luckily, the method I'm going to use for the balance test, I will show 2 methods at your request, by the way, but my scan tool will control for that because it's going to use direct PCM control to operate the injectors. But I'm also, many of you that had brought up, and by the way, it was probably 80% of people that said they wanted to do the imbalance test because they thought the injector was the reason. But many people said that they wouldn't themselves have the ability to do an injector test because they don't have a scan tool. So I will show you another method, although it still involves buying a tool. As far as for what else could cause an insufficient fuel delivery on just one bank, under load, I'm going to admit I'm pretty hard pressed to come up with anything. That would be about it. So we'll go with that unless maybe some other ideas come to mind. Obviously, the limitation with using a rational, logical reasoning method is you are limited by your knowledge of the systems. Obviously, the more things we put up on the board, the better of a chance we catch the problem. But if we aren't aware of something or not educated or something, then of course it doesn't make it to the board. And if that is your problem, well, you've got an issue. So that's the reason why I'm building that database of that library of diagnosis and understanding so that we can cover as many parts, understand them. The more we understand, the better our troubleshooting will be. Let's move on to the next one. The next possibility would be anything that could cause an increase in unmetered error only on bank 1 under load. And of course, most of you guys put exhaust leak there. And originally, I actually thought that was probably the most likely, especially if you've heard my car's exhaust. It's got a rather significant aftermarket setup and it's quite loud, so it'd be very hard to hear an exhaust leak. But after doing my previous video studying exhaust leaks a little bit and trying to diagnose them with the scan tool, I'm convinced I would need a bit more of an exhaust leak than you would normally think, and it would still be one that I would hear pretty prominently. So I'm a little less inclined, but without question, exhaust leak explains the theory. It is rational and logical. Many of you guys probably aren't familiar with these engines, but I did put an air injection reaction leak on here, which technically kind of counts with the exhaust leak, but it is a separate system that we may want to check as well. Air injection reaction we haven't covered yet. We will someday, but a leak in the air injection reaction could be bank specific because it splits to both banks. And then, of course, several people indicated a misfire, and that is absolutely logical and rational. I did not show misfire data previously, but now given the fact that we have misfire data, and I didn't point out very clearly in the last video that there was absolutely no drivability issue, misfire we're pretty much able to rule out. But sorry if you chose the misfire there, but you did make a good decision based on the data, so you still win, so to speak. Again, you always win when you make a logical, rational conclusion based on the evidence. So that is definitely a good guess there. The third thing, of course, is what I'm more inclined to believe this may be. It would be a perceived issue with unmetered air or insufficient fuel delivery. Some issue with the oxygen sensor. Other people had brought up checking the oxygen sensors. I think one person brought up swapping banks, which is my favorite way of doing it. But another way that we could test this is with rich or lean condition induction. So we could create a vacuum leak, or we could create a rich condition using propane. So we may experiment with that and look and see if the O2 sensors respond equivalently. But in general, I like doing the swapping, but we'll go ahead and play with that a little bit. Let's see, also that would help with number 4, the false normal, which is just for sake of experimental or scientific conclusion. Anything else that I can think of is not coming to me now. I did check through the comments and I believe I covered everything. So if you are not on the list with your idea, then most likely you came up with an idea that would have necessarily affected both banks. That was the most common reason that you would not be on this list. Another possibility could, of course, be I forgot. That would be another one. And then the only other possibility, I guess, would be that you did not give an idea. But that's okay. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and I'm going to just drive the car, get it warmed up to make sure that we reproduce the conditions that we are finding this problem in. And then we'll go ahead and do an injector imbalance test. Oh, one thing, sorry, but one thing. One thing that I'm really pretty proud of, actually, is what wasn't suggested to me is actually a huge, huge milestone for the channel in confirming. I've said before, I wanted to create an environment where all of us sidestep the idiocy that we see in a lot of other channels and chat rooms and Yahoo Answers. Not one single person, not one, mentioned try using, oh, what's that stuff called? Seafoam on the engine. Seafoam, if you're not familiar, is kind of like a fuel injector cleaner product, and you're supposed to put in your engine, and it's like a pipe cleaner for the engine. Seafoam is only used by people who have absolutely no idea what they want to do and how to diagnose things. They just use it as a shot in the dark. Not one single person mentioned that. Not a single person mentioned try using fuel injector cleaner. Not a single person mentioned try changing plugs and wires. So congratulations to you guys. I think we clearly have succeeded in creating an environment that is conducive to people who can think rationally about causes of things and not just guess at stupid snake oil stuff. So I just wanted to mention that. I'm really, really proud of that. And really, all of you guys, I think we've all found the right place. So let's get that imbalance test done now. All right, well, I set up my Auto Ingenuity scan tool here, and we will cover another way to do this too. But I have shown this actually several times before. But just really briefly, the way this works is very simple. We're going to pressurize the fuel system. I have a fuel pressure gauge hooked up to the Schrader valve. Thank goodness for a Schrader valve, by the way. If you happen to be an automotive engineer and you design fuel systems and you do not put a Schrader valve on the fuel system, I would like to punch you in the throat. But anyway, the point is, we pressurize the system and then individually fire the injectors one at a time. Upon firing the injector, of course, the engine is static, it's at rest, the engine is not running, but we do have the pump primed. When we fire that injector, it will, of course, drop pressure in the rail exactly based on the firing of the injector. We then repressurize the rail, go to the next injector, fire that injector under a specific number of pulses, and that should identically drop pressure in the rail. If it does not, then there is some type of imbalance in the fuel delivery between those injectors. So that's what we're going to do here. So let me set up. Now it's tempting, because we only have a single bank problem, to only go ahead and do quickly tests only the one bank. But one thing we want to consider, is it possible that all the injectors on the bank are equally below spec compared to the other bank? So what we'll want to do is get a couple of control fires on the bank 2 injectors, which we know are firing good, just to make sure that we match up with those numbers. All right, just to kind of show the procedure a little bit here, I'm going to select my fuel injector balance test, and we're going to go ahead and initiate this. Let me get a control injector first. So what I'm going to do is I've selected injector number 2, which I know is going to be a good one. And what it's going to do is, you can hear it prime. So it primed, and now it's going to fire the injector. Okay, and then what we would do is zoom in on that and read exactly what that number is. All injectors better be identical. And you guys have a little error due to parallax there, but it reads almost exactly 50, almost exactly. So obviously this is maybe not the best gauge for this method. A really nice gauge with a big dial would be better. But now let's go ahead and run one more control. All right, so let's go ahead and do number 4. So it should prime again. And let's see, there's our activity. And we can see that it, and again, I may have moved the angle of the camera a little bit, and actually looking through the screen, it looks like it may be 1 psi lower, but I can tell you that looking straight on at the gauge, it is exactly 50 again. So our 2 control tests worked good. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and repeat this on all the injectors on bank 1, and let's go ahead and see what happens.